Talking with the experts.
Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. My name's Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com, and Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners, and you can find it on all good podcasting streaming platforms and on YouTube. And today my guest is Matthew Eyet, and Matthew is a lawyer. How about that? That's my second one I've had on. And Matthew received his law degree from Widener University School of Law, where he graduated first in his class and received the prestigious Valedictorian Award. And during law school, he participated in the Moot Court Honour Society and was a member of the Law Journal. As a member of the Moot Court Honour Society, his team received the Best Brief Award at the Jerome Prince Evidence Competition at Brooklyn Law School. And following his law degree, Matthew earned his Masters of Law in Taxation from New York University School of Law. Well, that's a pretty impressive resume, Matthew. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I welcome the opportunity. It's an exciting topic that a lot of people, I can understand the interest in this topic from your audience because it's very confusing. And there are a lot of different laws and rules and enactments that have led up to where we are today. So we're excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about whether people have received their PPP. So if they have, what happens after that?
So there's really two considerations here for most PPP borrowers. There's the concept of the first draw PPP, which typically occurred back in, I want to say, the spring of 2020. The funding and the agreement to the loan terms occurred April, May 2020. Then there's the second draw that was enabled by the act of legislation that was on December 27th of 2020, and that enabled second draw loans. Okay, so with respect to those who received funds on the first draw before June 5th, and this is where it gets technical confusing, but you can use a different period to determine what costs you can use to get a forgiveness of your PPP loan. And so that gets into the nuances of this, but I just want to throw that out there now that there's a special rule for that. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to just stay with what's called the covered period as opposed to the alternative covered period for the purpose of expenses.
Okay, so for those in Australia, the PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program, and it was enacted. It's called the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act, and it was approved to make loans more flexible in how and when they're used. So Matthew's going to be talking about that because we don't have those here in Australia. So it's obviously a US-based thing. So maybe if you could just explain it a little bit for other viewers that don't come from the US, that might be great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so once coronavirus hit and in the States, the government essentially they shut down operations for businesses and things of that nature, the lockdown, so to speak.
Yeah.
There was a series of legislative enactments from Congress that first it expanded an existing program called the Paycheck Protection Program, but that was really only available pre-COVID to startup businesses and like tech type companies that had a lot of capital needed in order to get them off the ground, right? And so the requirements were much more challenging to qualify, but it was a very popular product in the States here because if you did qualify, it was a 1% interest rate. And I mean, that's ideal for any startup company.
Mm.
What the first enactment was called the CARES Act. I forget all the
yeah, that's okay.
At least, but the CARES Act expanded that program, and then there was the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act that went a little bit further, and that was in, I believe, April of 2020. And then in June, there was a third iteration of this, the version you just mentioned, the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. Yes, that act is the critical act for purposes of determining whether or not you get forgiveness. but I'm getting ahead of myself there. So the program is designed to essentially replace payroll expenses for small businesses, right? And so there's a cap on how many employees the business can have. And there's also limitations on whether or not you retain employees after you get the proceeds. So it's really designed for the businesses that want to try and keep afloat during the pandemic. And the reason it was expanded and made more flexible is because no one anticipated the pandemic would go on for as long as it did. And so as it dragged on, there was more pressure on Congress to provide more aid for small businesses. I mean, after all, there's some states over here where like businesses are not open, and some are still not open. They're just not allowed to be open. So the only way that they're going to remain afloat is if the owners have substantial capital reserves, which is not common for most startup businesses, or they receive funding from the government. So that's one of the main vehicles. There's also other vehicles here in the States. There's an economic injury disaster loan that's somewhat similar, and businesses can qualify for both, quite frankly, if they can demonstrate the need. But the Paycheck Protection Program is by far the most popular and talked about program over here.
Yeah, we've had similar to that. It was called the Job Keeper and Job something or other, where employers got paid a subsidy from the government to keep their staff on. And so that was, I think that went for about a year or just under a year. So yeah, they got, it was quite a substantial amount of money per employee. So yeah, so it's very similar.
Now, was it a needs-based test that was done, or was it just a blanket?
Yeah, they had to apply for it. But still a lot of hospitality businesses and tourism businesses had to close because, they couldn't keep their staff, obviously for obvious reasons, because there was no one to go and do the touristy things or go to a restaurant or whatever. So it was really tough for the hospitality and tourism industry here.
Yes. And one of the big criticisms of the programs that they put in place here, the money didn't get to the small businesses fast enough because of all the red tape and the back and forth over the minutia of the programs.
Yeah.
Right? By the time people got the money, it was too late. They just had to fold up. So the estimates are pretty wild here about how many small businesses failed during this time period. But I guess we'll only see in the future when real numbers come out. But it's substantial numbers. Yeah,
he too. It was devastating to a lot of people. They had been in business for 20 or 30 years, and all of a sudden, they lost everything.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have that capital to still pay their overheads, because they still had overheads they had to pay. So yeah, it was devastating. It's just a pity that it's gone on for so long, this bloody virus.
Agreed. But it appears that over here we might be coming out of it. I heard New York State and City are open up completely as of the 19th. So we'll see if that happens. But that's that would be a really positive sign.
Yeah, it's good news. We keep different states here keep going into lockdown because of the pandemic. You get a cluster of cases somewhere, and so the whole state pretty much closes, and then you can't get in, you can't get out. So yeah, not good.
Yes.
Anyway, okay, we'll get back to the PPP. Sorry, we went on a bit of a tangent there, but so based on what I'm understanding is that small businesses had to apply for this money, and it helped them stay afloat, basically.
That was the intent, the design.
Yeah.
Now you might have heard some news stories that came out in the spring of 2020 about some big businesses, like internationally known businesses that got a lot of money. Right?
Yeah, Mercedes Benz was one of them, and I can mention them because they were in the paper. Mercedes Benz in Australia got a crap load of money, and they made like billions of dollars in profits.
Yes.
Go explain. It's not. I'd be asking the government, if I was in government, I'd be asking for a please explain.
Well, so as an aside to that, part of the problem, with the first draw, this is in spring of 2020, is that the parties who were charged with administering the eligibility requirements were the banks, right? And so a lot of the banks, unfortunately, used it as a way to get new business, right? Hey,
Yeah.
we can get you in line first for the PPP funds if you come bank with us. And of course you had to open an account with that bank. And, it became a very much a business generator for the financial industry.
Yeah.
And then once all the stories came out, then they corrected that with the second draw, and none of those businesses, they didn't dare go back for another PPP loan because, I mean, some of these companies had millions and millions of dollars sitting in cash in the bank. And yet they're taking money from the government to cover payroll costs when they could easily do it themselves. So it was kind of haphazardly designed at first. And that speaks to the variation I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the program, where there's a different rule for that first group of loans, that first tranche, so to speak.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that people take advantage of, the government's doing it in had all the great intentions to help the little person. But people take advantage of it, and I think it's just so wrong because really it grates me because I think it's just greed. It really is just greed.
Well, to that point, there's every day here a new story of someone that's getting indicted, or the feds are making an announcement that they've been arrested for PPP fraud. Right. So it's starting to really occur where, and I mean, some of the things people did with, shell companies and, moving payroll around and it's pure fraud. Right. And so they're actually going after these people and they're trying to make a big news issue out of it to scare people, obviously.
Well, it's a good thing too, because, people just can't be let get away with it.
Yes. Yeah.
And money wasn't intended for them. So why should they take advantage of it?
Yes. And so I anticipate that we'll see a lot of litigation and bankruptcy court here, because what happened was a lot of businesses, they got the PPP funds and then they filed for bankruptcy, right? But we weren't supposed to, it wasn't supposed to be for businesses that were closing down, right? And so there's a lot of friction right now between the bankruptcy court and how they're going to deal with some of these businesses. Basically, yes. So that I feel we'll be hearing about PPP for a long time over here, based solely on all the abuse that occurred.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know about the job keeper and job starter, or whatever it is that the government was handing out. How many companies are going to be dragged into court to pay the money back? Because honestly, I think it's a rort. It really is, and it's so unfair. But it's just, as I said, it's just their greed. And they have to keep making money. It doesn't matter who they hurt in the meantime. So your business, or your firm, actually does taxes, estate planning, and business services. So what type of business services do you represent?
So I like to think of our practice as sort of I'm not sure if familiar with this concept over in Australia, but there's a concierge medical movement, so to speak, in the healthcare industry, where what doctors become very knowledgeable of their patients. They just become one doctor for the family, and they get to know the kids. They know all the information about everyone, so it just makes it so much more efficient. So that there's been a shift towards that's kind of slowly been occurring. And so I like to view our practice as, because I have the tax background, because I have the business background, because I also do quite a bit of litigation, I like to view us as we're your attorney. And if it's something we can't handle, which it won't be much other than, criminal or family law, then, we'll refer you to someone that is going to be accountable to us. So it's kind of modeled after that. So for business services, we pretty much do everything. We form entities, we advise. We have several clients where we advise them on obtaining PPP loans or other, government relief, et cetera, and then through, the governance of the corporation and any legal needs that come up with, employment contracts or leases or purchasing property, et cetera, et cetera. So it's pretty much a full spectrum approach.
Yeah, I reckon it's a great idea too, because you don't want to be chopping and changing lawyers just because you've got a different issue,
Yes.
and it's great that you can actually go to a one-stop shop and have most of your litigation or legal aspects taken care of in the one firm. So that's really great, because you don't often hear of that. A lot of places just deal in one specific type of law. So yeah, good on you. So how long have you had this business? I don't think it's been that long, has it? Or
I broke my practice off from a firm that I had been at for almost 7 years beforehand. I had a dispute with my ex-partners and we went our separate ways. And so I started this firm in October of 2019, just before, a few months before the pandemic hit. And so just to go back to that one point, the idea for this came to me when I have 2 young children, a boy and a girl, 7 and 5. And when we would take them to the pediatrician, every time it was a group, a practice group. Every time it was a different doctor.
Yeah.
And I had to explain all the nuances of each child. And I was just like, why, this is so inefficient. Why can't there be more continuity in this? So why can't I apply that concept to what I do? So that's kind of where the idea started about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's a great concept, because I know a lot of practices are like that. You don't get to see the same doctor all the time because that particular doctor is either too booked out, or they don't work on certain days. So you're forced to go and see another doctor. Then you got to start all over again and tell the story. And oh my God, it's such a pain, because you just want to get treated, and you don't want to have to keep explaining yourself, because you just get tired of it.
Exactly.
And then you just don't bother going to the doctor anymore, because
which is obviously not what any society wants, but it happens, right?
It does, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I understand what the Paycheck Protection Program is. So that's really great. And as I said, it was probably it's probably very similar to what we had here. And you deal with all sorts of things, and you came up with a reason why you broke away and do what you do, which is really wonderful. So you do taxing and you do estate planning. So tell me a little bit more about estate planning, because a lot of people don't do it.
So in the States, the traditional concept of estate planning, for many years, there was a pretty well-known and understood playbook, so to speak, because the law hadn't changed for many, many years. And then we went through a period of time where it changed dramatically 5 or 6 times in 15 years. Right, we went from no estate tax then to estate tax with a very low credit exclusion amount. Then it had a humongous amount, and then it was peeled back. Now we're back up to the big exclusion amount. So all estate planning lawyers have been pulling their hair out for the last 20 years, trying to figure out how do we deal with all these changes with the existing documents that we had put together. So unfortunately, a lot of this is driven by tax, right? And it's almost, I wouldn't say all of it, but a huge majority of estate planning here is based solely on tax, because the tax code got so complicated that it creates opportunity, and there's these nuanced rules that only the people who have tons of money know, and it's not the greatest system here. So I'll start with that.
Yeah, ours is the same. Yeah.
And so, and obviously with the new administration that took office in the White House, there's talk of an estate tax that's going to go much higher, right? So now everyone's scrambling to try and figure out how do we deal with this, because what it means is the income tax and the estate tax here in the United States, they're progressive, right? And so the first X amount of dollars is taxed at a low level, then it goes up and up and up as your income goes up. Well, income of an estate or income in a trust, the max rate it hits very quickly. I think it's at about $16,000, right? And so
wow.
So at $16,000, you're already at 40% of whatever the taxable estate is, right? So there's a huge incentive to avoid paying any estate tax or income or tax, the estate tax upon death. So
yeah, we call it death tax, but yeah, same thing, only different. Yeah.
yeah, it's just messaging here, I guess, the estate tax. So one of the big concepts here that a lot of people understand, this could be helpful for some viewers in Australia, is the idea of a stepped up basis upon death in assets that are appreciated. So I'm not sure if you have a similar system there, where if you bought a house for $100,000 and you sell it for $200,000 and you didn't improve it at all, then your tax gain would be $100,000.
Yeah, we've got what's it called? I can't remember what it's called, but yeah, there is a gains tax. Yes, if you make a profit on something, an asset, yeah, you've got to pay capital gains tax. Yes, you do.
Yes, that's what we call it as well. And again, that's another distinction that might be essentially irrelevant if the Biden administration can pass the legislation that they proposed, where they would put the rate for capital gains at exactly the same rate for ordinary income that you would get if you were an employee at a business. Again, people are scrambling to try and figure out what to do there. Now, for estate planning purposes, this concept of a stepped up basis, it's really the rationale behind it is, picture a farmer in Iowa, right? That they own this, the family has owned land for decades, right? This land over time has appreciated so much in value, but it's farmland. They can only make so much money from that land. Well, when the second of the second spouse to die dies, well, now all of a sudden you have a $10 million property, but there's no liquidity to pay the estate tax on that property. So the idea was, when someone passes, if they own the property in their own name, whatever your tax cost basis was, so say you paid $100,000 for that house and it's worth 10 million when you die, if you still own it when you pass away, when it passes to your heirs, the basis is now $10 million. It's called a stepped up, so that tax gain disappears. So there's a huge planning concept here. So if anyone owns property over in the States, that especially if they own in New York City, because the values skyrocket there. And especially from 2008, 2009, I think they're quadrupled in certain places.
Wow.
So it's a very important thing to avoid a big tax. Now, I should also mention that the reverse is also true. So if, say, you pay $10 million for a house and it's only worth $100,000 when you pass away, you then lose the loss that you would otherwise be able to use to offset gain from other property sale. So they always say you want to hold on to the appreciated assets till you die and sell the ones that depreciated before you die.
Yeah, that's what people do. They get rid of their antiques. They give them away.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of planning focuses on that. And then there's also another big concept. It's called the lifetime exclusion amount, which is essentially, it's an $11 million credit, and they adjust it for inflation, but we'll call it $11 million because that's what everyone remembers the number at. It's $11 million credit per person. So your entire estate, if it doesn't exceed $11 million, then you don't pay any federal estate tax. Now, you still might have to pay at the state level, but you don't have to pay federal. And that's especially important for married couples because they get to each use the unused portion of each other's credit.
Oh, okay.
So a married couple, so there's people that will get married solely for that purpose, right before they have a life partner at the end of life, and they get married so that they can use the bigger credit. Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, that's a good problem to have if you're above $11 million.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
quite a few people, I suppose.
More than you would think, actually, in my experience. But maybe that's has something to do with the metropolitan area that we work out of. There's quite a few wealthy people here in the New York City area. So, but yeah, at $11 million, not many people are too worried about the estate tax. But just I think it was 14 years ago, it was only $1 million, right? And so then that brought a lot more people in, again, who have homes where the value, it could be $2 million right there. So then the husband and the wife's, their entire credit is gone. So the
Mm.
value of any accounts, any cars, and all that is being taxed at 40% once you get above 16,000. So it made people very nervous. And when it was a low credit, right now it's a big credit, but who knows what's going to happen with the current administration.
Yeah, wow, it sounds really complicated.
I know. It's that you have to go. So here
You definitely need a lawyer.
you do. As you read my resume, you'll notice there was a whole additional year of just tax
Yeah,
coursework that I
law,
had to
yeah.
take,
Tax
right?
law
And
here is really complicated, and I know a lot of lawyers and whatever, they spend a huge amount of time trying to understand the complexities of tax law. It's does their head in.
so to that point, typically in the States here, a tax lawyer will charge about a third more than a comparable lawyer or partner in a different area because there's so many changes that about a third of the tax attorney's time is spent just reading on non-billable time, just
Yeah,
getting up to speed with what just occurred
yeah,
with the IRS.
yeah. All right, Matthew. I don't suppose you've written any books on this stuff, have you?
Not yet, but I was planning on one day.
One day, yeah. I'm the one day type of person too. Never don't know about that.
Exactly. When I'm on a
Yeah.
beach one day, retired, I'll write a book, I suppose.
Yeah, probably. So where are your offices? Where can people find you?
Sure. We're located about 45 minutes outside of New York City in New Brunswick, New Jersey, which is right in the middle of the state of New Jersey, if you can picture on a map.
Yeah, I watch SVU, so I know where that is.
Fair enough. All right. And so we practice in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and U.S. tax court.
Yeah.
And then all the federal courts as well in those states.
Yeah, and
So,
you got a website, and you're on LinkedIn. Perfect.
yes,
I might hook you up with a lawyer. He's in New York as well, so I might hook you up with him. He's really nice. I like him.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, you probably know him anyway. I can't think of his name at the present moment, but yeah, he's quite good. I'll do an introduction.
That'd be great. But there are a lot of lawyers here, so I will say that I might not know him.
Yeah, well, you probably, I don't know. He's in the sort of same area as you. He does taxes and all that sort of stuff too. So be interesting to find out. Well, Matthew, any wise words for people before we leave today?
So I guess would you want me to speak to the PPP program again, or just in general?
Yeah, just something so people, can get some, I don't know, some more understanding about their obligations or what they need to do, and how they can get the thing moving forward if it's still available.
Yes. So there's a lot of very technical rules involved with the process, but I guess what might be most helpful for anyone considering if they still want to try and go for funding, there are so many programs here that are available at both excuse me, at the federal and the state level. I think at one point my firm, I personally applied for, we were 7 applications for different assistance programs because the 3 layers of government, state, local, and federal. So PPP is not the exclusive route to obtain relief if it's needed, but it's by far the one that's in the news the most and that it was abused the most. So maybe that's why it became a hot button issue. But in order to follow the strict process of getting the loans forgiven, it's quite complicated. And I guess to your point earlier, you might want to consult either a CPA or even an attorney. Like I said, we provide that service, but it's quite complicated, especially if the borrower did not have a lot of payroll expense during the time period as soon as they got the money. Right? Because if you think about it in theory, the program was designed to replace the pay that was going to go to employees. Well, if you didn't pay any of your employees after you took the money, then you're into the weeds on how to get this loan forgiven if you can at all.
Yeah.
So that's really the people that have to be most concerned, the entities that didn't have a lot of payroll once they got the funds.
Yeah, that's I guess a little bit dodgy, really, isn't it? You shouldn't
is.
apply for anything if you're not going to use the money.
Well, very.
All right, Matthew, thank you so much for all that information. It was absolutely awesome. And thank you for joining me today. I really enjoyed the experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate this.
All right, Matthew.